guys, in this session today we're going to be looking at something that is just in particular important for Year 9 in their end of unit test for population, but it's also quite useful in Year 12 and looking at the Clark-Fisher model because the two things kind of tie in. And today's topic is the demographic transition model. So I'm going to talk you through the 4 stages of the model. We're going to look at why the different birth rates and death rates and overall population in the model fluctuate as they do, and then we're going to look at linking it to the Clark-Fisher model, which is looking at levels and sectors of jobs within each of the zones, each of the countries. So the demographic transition model, demography is the study of population. So this is a model about transition, which means change, so the change in population over time. And it is a model, and it was invented or thought of to do with how the UK and how Europe moved in its population from the 1800s through the Industrial Revolution, through to secondary manufacturing, into tertiary and to today. But what we can also apply it to is lots of countries around the world, because different countries will be in different stages. So we're going to get straight in and have a look. So stage 1 is called the high stationary stage. Now the 3 lines that I've got on the board, which you can see are kind of squiggling all over the place, they represent birth rate, death rate and overall population. Now the birth rate is the red line, the death rate is the blue line, and the overall population is the green line. So we're going to look at what happens to them over time. So in stage 1, which would be a very, very poor country, somewhere like Ethiopia, somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, etc., we've got very high birth rate and death rate, and as a consequence the overall population is very, very low, because birth rates are very, very high, as you know, due to things like lack of contraception, people wanting big families so that the children can work on farms. Culturally, it's more acceptable for people to have large families, etc. So lots of different reasons why the birth rate is very, very high. Infant mortality, I think I just said, is very high, so people tend to have more and more children, and the average children will be 4, 5 or 6 or more children. So the birth rate is very, very high. The death rate, similarly, is very high as well. They're both fluctuating, and this is called high stationary, and the birth and the death rate is fluctuating. The death rate is very high due to very, very poor healthcare, poor sanitation, lack of clean water, lack of vaccinations, etc. for children. So the birth rate's high, but the death rate's high as well. Life expectancy will be very low in these countries as well, maybe 42 or 48, because there will not be very good healthcare. So as we can see, the overall population is very low. So we do think sometimes about these places in Africa having very high populations, but they don't. They have quite low populations because life expectancy is very low, birth rates are high, but death rates and infant mortalities are high as well. So this is stage 1. High birth rate, high death rate, low overall population, and most of the jobs are in primary. They're in agriculture. So that's why the government isn't getting any taxes, because people who are working on farms don't pay that many taxes, they're not earning that much money. Not an awful lot of secondary and very little quaternary or tertiary jobs. So the government's not getting an awful lot of money to spend on healthcare and education, etc. So we've got this situation where we've got very poor quality of life. So that is stage 1. Stage 2 is called early expanding, and this is where the population starts to increase, because here you can see the birth rate stays very high, the death rate starts to decline, and life expectancy starts to increase, so that increases the overall population. So birth rates in stage 2, even though the country is getting a little bit richer, as we'll talk about in a second, the birth rate remains high. And the reason for that is that it's quite normal for, and culturally it's quite normal for people to continue to have a lot of children. It's very difficult to change a culture over a small amount of time. So people will be used to having a lot of children. So even if the economy gets a little bit better, people are still having 3, 4, 5 children, even though maybe those children are living longer, life expectancy is better, and the amount of children who survive is better. But culturally it's still acceptable, socially acceptable to have a lot of children. So the birth rate remains high. The death rate plummets quite rapidly, it declines quite rapidly. And this is due to improvements in healthcare, quite basic improvements. So just clean water being available, some vaccinations being available, a little bit better medical healthcare, etc. Then the death rate will plummet quite quickly. So this leads to higher overall population because life expectancy increases. So more children are living, people are living longer, the birth rate's still high, the death rate's declining, so your overall population starts to increase. And as we can see here, high birth rate, decline in death rate, a rise in overall population, and we know that when we move from stage 1 to stage 2, we're moving from primary jobs to secondary jobs. Now when we move to manufacturing, then people get more money, they start paying taxes, there's more tertiary jobs available, a little bit more, so the governments get more taxes, and the government's able to put that into just quite simple things like slight improvements in healthcare and improvements in water quality will decrease the death rate quite considerably, quite quickly. And a slight increase in education means that people are maybe getting better skilled jobs, they're paying more taxes, etc. So that's got a positive multiplier effect on how the population gets on in terms of its healthcare, etc. So it increases the overall population. So that is the stage 2. In stage 3, as we can see here, I'm just going to move this a tiny bit. So stage 3 is what we call low stationary. And stage 3 are countries like China and Brazil. Now here in stage 3, the birth rate does start to decline, and the birth rate declines because it's more socially acceptable now to have fewer children. You don't need them working on the farms, you don't need them working for you, they're living longer, infant mortality is a lot lower because healthcare is better, and it's more socially acceptable to have fewer children, and also more importantly is that there are a lot more opportunities for women to have an education, to have a career, to get a job, etc. So there's no need for women to be having children all the time, unless they choose to. And so maybe family sizes decrease, so only having 2 or 3 children instead of 4 or 5. So the birth rate declines. The death rate continues to be low as health gets better. So that death rate, I should say, is now quite low. Life expectancy is improving. So we're living 60, 65, 70, we're getting up to maybe in China and Brazil, places like that, some of the BRICS. So the overall population now really increases. And here, stage 3, these are the countries in the world, the BRICS, China, India, where we've got huge population booms, because not only we still have birth rates are still, people aren't having 1 or 2 children, although we do have the one-child policy in China, but death rates are very low and life expectancy is getting much higher. So we've got a very large population. So decline in birth rate, low death rate still, high overall population, and we're moving from secondary and we're getting a lot more tertiary here. So a lot more money going into services to improve education, to improve people's skills, to improve healthcare, etc. So overall that leads to an increase in the overall population, and that is stage 3. And the final stage is stage 4, and that's where we are in Europe, the UK, North America, Australia, Japan, those kind of high income countries. So we are in stage 4. Now, we are what we call stage 4 is declining. Now, the reason it's declining is that the overall population is actually dipping, and these are the reasons why. Birth rate and death rate are very low. Birth rate's very low in European countries because, again, there's more opportunities for women to have jobs, have better jobs, have careers, and fertility rates, which is the length of time that's available for women to have children. So a woman is able to have a child from when she first has a period. So in these poorer countries, maybe there's women or girls having babies at 13, 14, 15. In the UK, there's women having babies a lot older, maybe into their late 20s, early 30s, even into their 40s. So that window of being able to have children, fertility rates is a lot smaller. So women are having children later, they're having smaller numbers of children, some women are choosing not to have children, etc. So we've got starting to have a decrease in the overall population because a lot of people are just not having as many children as they were maybe in stage 2 and stage 3. Death rates are still very low, and life expectancy, as we know, is really high, and we can be getting up to 80, 82, 85, especially for women who tend to live longer than men. And so the overall population is still high, but because the birth rates are declining, then the overall population will start to fall in some of these countries. And we can see that in places like Sweden, which is barely kind of recovering its population is actually declining. So that's more normal in these poorer, richer countries. So we've got low birth rate, low death rate, and a declining population. And that we can see as we've got lots of tertiary jobs and moving into quaternary work as well. So that is the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. That's your link to the Clark-Fisher model. So the Clark-Fisher model and the demographic transition model kind of work together Demographic transition model just looks at the population. The Clark-Fisher model will look at changes in population, changes in employment. But the two are really, really linked because one kind of helps the other out. So when we have primary jobs, then we haven't got a lot of taxes being paid to the government. Healthcare is very, very poor. As we move into manufacturing and TNCs moving into these areas, providing FDI, then we've got an increase in population as healthcare improves because more money is being put in from taxes. Then we move into tertiary and secondary in places like China and India. And then we move into quaternary jobs and tertiary jobs within Europe and the UK. Now, what I've also done here for this video is I've also put in the 4 population pyramids that are connected to each stage, so we can just very quickly have a look at those. So in stage 1, as you can see, this will be the population pyramid that is connected to stage 1, which would be a very poor country like Ethiopia, like we said before, somewhere like that. So it's got a very, very wide base. As we know, the population pyramid is a pyramid shape, but it's a kind of very thin and wide pyramid. So a very wide base indicating lots and lots of births. And then as we go up, it's quite small because life expectancy is quite short, and it's tapered at the top or narrow at the top because not that many people are living past maybe the age of 50, 55. And we've got males and females either side, as you can see from the colours. Not too much difference there really, but overall females do tend to live longer than males. So that's what we've got here in stage 1. As we move into stage 2, you can see that the pyramid is filling out, it's bulking out a little bit. As we've got a decline in infant mortality, more of those younger people are living longer as we go up the pyramid, so the pyramid's starting to get a little bit bulkier. We start maybe to see not massively a decline in the base, because remember that birth rates are still increasing, but as we go up the pyramid, not as many people are dying because the healthcare is better, so the pyramid starts to get a little bit fatter in the middle. It still might be a little bit short because life expectancy is still, although it's higher than stage 1, it's still quite low. So that is number 2. That's stage 2. Stage 3, we can see that the pyramid starting to change shape now, and it's becoming more of a barrel shape. Now, as you can see, the birth rate's starting to decline, so it's getting a little bit narrower at the bottom, but it's definitely thickening up towards the top, and it's quite wide at the top now as life expectancy increases, infant mortality's dropped, people are living much longer, so it becomes more of a barrel shape. And by the time we get to stage 4, as you can see here, it's definitely what we would call a barrel shape. Now, this would be the UK, and as we can see, it's tapering at the bottom. So we've got a narrowing at the bottom, whereas we had a narrowing at the top here. So in stage 4, we have definitely got a decrease in birth rates. So not as many children being born for the reasons that we just talked about before. So what we can see is a tapering at the bottom as we stop having so many children. The barrel's really, really big through the middle because we've had baby booms during the 1960s, during the 1940s as well. So these people, there were a bigger population in the UK during those times. So they're still alive, obviously, because they're kind of my age if they were the 60s baby boom, or my parents' age if they were born in the 40s. So these people are still alive because the healthcare is still really good. And then as we go towards the top, it starts tapering out as people start dying, obviously at 1885. So we can see a difference in the population pyramids connected to the 4 stages. So that is the demographic transition model, and hopefully you'll be able to link that to your Clark-Fisher model, which is looking at employment changes over time. And remember, the 2 are linked. So this is useful for Year 9, but it's also useful for GCSE and also A-level as well.